Happy Sabbath, and let's begin opening with a word of prayer. Dear God of heaven and earth, we thank you for this, thy holy Sabbath day. Bless us as we have gathered together to unpack a few more things. And we just pray that you'll be present and that your Holy Spirit will guide and direct in our discussion, in our studying, in our interactions with each other. Bless those that are not here, and we just ask that everyone be kept safe wherever they are, and have a blessed Sabbath. We love you, Lord, and we want to be used of you. So help us continue to grow and strengthen to that end, and to surrender everything to you. In Jesus' name, and for his sake, amen. Widen this a little bit. And we're going to be beginning a bit of a study on Acts 27. I'm going to call this part 1, as it says on the whiteboard behind me. But I'm going to also do a few introductory things. You know me. Anyway, I just want us to brainstorm a little wee bit. And I'm just going to divide off the whiteboard here for a moment, because this is just sort of a preliminary 5 to 10 minutes. I just want us to discuss a little, brainstorm together a wee bit. And what it's about is recent external events every time we meet. It's like we sort of, think, wow, everything is happening so fast, so much is happening, that kind of thing. And certainly this week hasn't been any different. But let's just brainstorm a little wee bit in terms of some of the things that are happening. I'm going to list countries a wee bit here and there, but I'm going to start with Israel. So does anyone want to update, as of today, anything that's happening? Has anyone paid attention already? I know it's Sabbath, but anyone paid attention to
Yeah, the attack on Israel, they was it Hummus? They had a unexpected bomb that killed 700 people and injured so many more. Something like that this morning already.
Excellent, Allie. Thank you so much. And one report had it that there were 5,000 missiles. That was from Hamas themselves. Israel put it at 2,200, I think. The toll is increasing, over the course of these hours when it first began. But it evidently, Netanyahu has labeled it, "We are at war." And some of the history behind, I didn't do a lot of search because I was obviously on another little different bent, ready for this morning's presentation. But the anniversary, 1967 and 1973 were, in a sense, big years in terms of Israel. And I'll just mention as well that Hezbollah in Lebanon has gained or affirmed Hamas in what they've been doing. But 1967, let me see. Yeah, 6-Day War of 1967. I'm just going to read a couple of things. I just jotted it quickly into a note so I could reference it. But the 6-Day War of 1967, 6 memorable days known to Israelis as the 6-Day War and to Arabs and others as the 1967 War redrew the region's landscape in fundamental ways. In those 6 days, Israel defeated 3 Arab armies, gained territory 4 times its original size, and became the preeminent military power in the region. And the 6-Day War had its origins in disputes between Israel and Egypt over the rights of Israeli shipping to pass through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. We didn't draw the Suez Canal in obviously Egypt on one side and Israel to get south, into Africa and even around Africa and so on. Shipping, they would need access to the Red Sea. And then in reference to the 1973 war, and it was the anniversary. Well, actually, October 6th, I saw one report, but I mean, here it was October 7th. But the Yom Kippur War brings the United States and the USSR to the brink of conflict. So the surprise attack by Egyptian and Syrian forces on Israel in October 1973 throws the Middle East into turmoil and threatens to bring the United States and the Soviet Union into direct conflict for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Though actual combat did not break out between the two nations, the events surrounding the Yom Kippur Day of Atonement, obviously, war seriously damaged US-Soviet relations and all but destroyed President Richard Nixon's much publicized policy of détente coming together. Initially, it appeared that Egypt and Syria would emerge victorious from the conflict, but it turns out Israel won. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, together with the Soviet counterparts, eventually arranged a shaky ceasefire. When it became clear that Israel would not give up its siege of the Egyptian troops, who were already low on food and medicine, the Soviets threatened to take unilateral action to rescue them. And Washington and Moscow, the US went on stage 3 alert. Stage 1 alert is outright war. Anyway, Kissinger particularly, they termed it shuttle diplomacy. He kept flying back and forth around different areas and negotiating, diplomacy and trying to bring about. So let's see, eventually Israeli troops withdrew from some of their positions in both the Sinai and Syrian territory, while Egypt promised to forego the use of force in its dealings with Israel into the future. Syria grudgingly accepted the peace plan, but remained adamantly opposed to the existence of the Israeli state. So that's 1973. And of course, the Gaza Strip with the Palestinians, wanting to have their own nation. So it's been a hotbed for a long time, Golan Heights and, some of these different areas. But anyway, Ali, you are correct. That was a little bit of a breaking news this morning. Anything else? So Hamas attacking Israel, the Palestinians. I mean, back at this time, Palestinian Liberation Front, PLO, or organization, PLO was more active, but Hamas wanted to do things get more results, and so on towards a Palestinian state, and so they're still very active now. Any other things if I was to put down USA?
when they
Any other?
voted out McCarthy just recently by the
Ah,
Republicans.
yes.
The Republicans voted out the Republicans. So I thought that was really neat. Crumbling within the walls.
I'll put forced to vacate. Forced to vacate. Vacate as Speaker of the House, as GOP Speaker of the House. And it was kind of interesting, some of the dynamics surrounding it, Tuesday, Wednesday. Allie, do you remember who it was that initiated?
Yeah, he had a different name. It was Gant something.
Matt Gaetz. Yeah, Matt Gaetz, you're right. Far right. And he was joined by 8 other Republicans. And it only, Kevin McCarthy himself had actually been instrumental in agreeing to make a new rule in the House of Representatives in Congress that only one member is needed to force a vote on the Speaker of the House. And part of that came about because Kevin McCarthy, it took 15 rounds before Kevin McCarthy finally had the support, had the votes needed to make him Speaker of the House. But at the same time, it was a case that this new rule, Kevin McCarthy agreed to it because he, in some cases, didn't really almost have any other choice. He trying to hold this party together, and as they have control of the House, but by a very slim margin, and he's trying to work things out and keep things still having a semblance of order. So he agreed to that new rule, and of course it was there because a lot of people, GOP Republicans, even when he was voted in, he barely squeaked in as Speaker of the House. And a lot of people were not happy with him being in that role. And that's continued all the way through. I think it's only 4 months that he's been Speaker of the House, something like that. So 8 other Republicans voted as well. And then the vote came in. And does anybody remember what happened with Democrats? What happened with the Democrats? Did they vote to save Kevin McCarthy and keep him alive, or did they not vote?
I remember reading something about Cortez saying they would welcome him onto the Democratic Party. I could be wrong what I read, but that seemed strange when I read that.
Well, and that's it, Allie. The Democrats, one of their biggest arguments was that they can't trust Kevin McCarthy. And of course, some of the GOP Republicans were saying that same thing. But because the Republicans felt Kevin McCarthy with the new saving the U.S. government from shutting down. Last week, the vote that came in, Kevin McCarthy ended up getting Democratic support for the new thing. They left Ukraine funding, military funding, right off, and so it was able to pass through the House with the Democrats. But that was the very thing that these far right Republicans absolutely went ballistic over, because him getting support from Democrats is just an absolute no-no. They'd rather shut down the government, halt everything, and because they're anti big government, right? And they're anti-immigration, they're anti all of these things. So anyway, the Democrats did end up voting as a bloc against Kevin McCarthy. They weren't willing to save his speakership. And interestingly, at the same time, we could say, I'm just throwing this in just as a little add-on, but Canada, Speaker of the House, the House of Commons, Parliament, was voted out. And then this week, that was Anthony Rota, I think it was. Rota. And then voted in Greg, his name just escaped me. Fergus, I think it is. Oh, it just went over my head. Sorry. Fergus, I think it is the new one. A liberal. And of course, Speaker of the House has to be neutral, but that was over. Anthony Rota, as Speaker of the House, had invited into the gallery a gentleman surnamed Hunka, I think it was, and it was discovered, it hadn't been vetted, by the department that's supposed to do that in a sense, and it slipped through. But the Speaker of the House has to take the fall, and so he did eventually resign. But this gentleman evidently served on a Nazi force fighting for Hitler in World War II, and so it was a big outcry against him and calling for his resignation, which he did do. Because the buck stops with the Speaker of the House. He can invite whoever he wants, and it has to be proper protocol, but it also has to be that all of the members of Parliament, the MPs, can trust if someone's there on behalf as a special guest of the Speaker of the House, that it's a valid thing. And Vladimir Zelensky was in the House of Commons that very day, also standing and applauding because of the way the gentleman had been introduced as a war hero, a Ukrainian fighting in World War II, but here it turns out he was on the Nazi side. And of course, Putin made hay with the whole thing. And because initially with the war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has consistently stated that Ukraine, they're Nazis, they're against Russia, they want to take Russia down, and all of these untruths and misinformation. Anyway, Iran will be the last one we just look at quickly. Any news in this last week regarding Iran? Did anyone? Okay. Okay, morality police. That's sort of it's not what they're called, but that's basically what they are. Morality police ended up, it can't be confirmed because the video footage that was released doesn't show anything, but from all indications, they attacked a 16-year-old girl who is still currently in a coma. Her friends were able to get her off the public transit train, rapid transit train, but she's in a coma. And of course, it was because she was not wearing a headscarf, a job that, and it was actually almost, I think it was September 22nd that Asa Amini was brutally murdered. So it's not quite on the anniversary, but very close to it, and a very similar kind of situation, and so on. And so, of course, there's been an outcry, and in Iran, people are still strong in wanting to start upholding and unifying, becoming more and more united as a populace on this women's rights issues. A friend of mine just returned from Iran. She had been there actually for a month, then went over to Turkey, to Istanbul for a month, and made her way back to Canada. But Iranian herself, family there, and she was just letting me know that in Tehran and some of the bigger centers possibly as well, but many women, hardly anybody is wearing headscarves, hijabs, and that's it. She was saying they can't attack everybody, they can't fight everybody, and she did comment something I'd already known, that many of the Iranian men, actually are standing with the women. Some of the protests, in a sense, maybe sort of had died off a little, but some of these continuing events keep stirring it up, and they're in it for the long haul. They want equality.
That's
So
impressive.
go ahead, Allie. Yes.
So that story of your friend who just came back, very impressive to hear. That report that a lot of women are not wearing headscarves and that the men are standing with them. Like, that's very impressive.
Yes, it
Like,
is.
I was
Very,
just reading an article the other day about a very private, very underground, very secretive school where women are studying in where is it? Not Iraq, Afghanistan. You know how it's so illegal there, right?
yes.
But women are still doing the illegal thing under the Taliban, and one day there's going to be a big uprising there too, I'm sure, if it's in other parts of the Arabic world.
And we'll put Afghanistan because it, in a sense, hasn't been in the news a lot, but Taliban is still holds power, but it's the human spirit in many cases is not only resilient but indomitable, not willing to give up, and often very courageous. And to hear what you're saying, Allie, is encouraging, as it is in respect to Iran as well. I mean, education there is under the Shah, education was really lifted up, and in a sense, they couldn't totally eradicate it. So education still does happen somewhat for women, but it's not the same as for men. I'm just going to put women can access underground resources. Particularly in terms of education. School, for example. And I mean, I just wanted to start briefly with a couple of current events, because as I said earlier, I mean, events happen so rapidly, things just keep happening and happening and so on, but just to sort of to mark it a little bit, because we know external events are paralleling internal events as we are going towards the Sunday law. We're just approaching it very closely, and we know that it's the waymark, and it's not necessarily a single point in time, but I mean, it is this period of time, the agitation of the Sunday Law, expanding to include the actual Sunday Law itself, but the fall of the United States and the fall of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, thank you for adding in things there. And so we are going to be talking a little bit about Acts 27. It was not my turn for today, and but I didn't want to see things canceled, and so that's it. I'm going to do what I've got, and I wanted to start with some of the external current events, but I'm also going to now take us to something else, 4 things, just sort of as a little bit of a, I'll just say prep or lead in, if you like, and then we'll sort of conclude with a little portion of Acts 27, and I will continue in the part 2 section. So I think I'm going to share my screen. I know I'm going to share my screen. Yes. So that's up there. Let's see what I can do. Okay, I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint presentation and just show a few things, as I say, 4 things basically. So bear with me. I've got some slides between, some of them just simply to not show subsequent slides, block them out. And I am going to ask 1 or 2 questions, and whoever feels brave enough or wants to or inclined to respond, I would very definitely appreciate some people weighing in and just giving their 2 cents worth. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this next slide. I want you to have a look at it and just tell me what you see. There we go. Whoops, took it too far. Okay, this thing is so sensitive. Okay. What was first impression, whatever? What was it? What did you see? Did you see it for enough time?
I don't know. To me, it reminded me of in the early days when people were trying to travel onto the west, going through the desert.
Ah, Henry, that's very good analogy. Okay. With horses, with donkeys, with wagons, with
Exactly.
whatever, and so what were you thinking? What brought that to your mind? What were you thinking you were seeing?
Well, it was just because they were in a row and things like that, and it looked like they're traveling a path.
Ah, okay, very good. Anyone else want to add anything? I mean, Henry, your answer was really good. And what did you notice? I'll put you on the spot, Henry. Just what stood out to you? Like, I mean, literally in the photograph, not sort of what made the connections or anything for you. What stood out for you in the actual photograph?
I don't know exactly what stood out, but it was just a quick analogy of it, where
Okay.
you didn't see much on the surroundings, and it looked like hardship.
Okay, and let me just put it back on screen for a moment. Oh, it's the other one. Okay, so there it is again. And now I'll show you what it actually is. Because what stands out most to me, and it was the first time I saw this photo, is the black, black. I thought, to me, it looked more like sort of donkeys than say horses. But in reality, this is what it was. This photo was taken by a drone, And the photo on the left, if you look at it, you can sort of see what the photo from above on high is capturing.
Zebra
And what
skin.
it is zebras. And what the eye gravitates to, which I just automatically, when I saw the photograph, I'm just thinking, oh, bunch of donkeys, dark donkeys, maybe, dark colored coats and so on, is actually their shadow, the sun coming from over here, obviously, whoops, casting a shadow. And as I say, this is very sensitive. Oh, I gotta watch myself with that. Anyway, the photograph on the right, forgive the blurriness, but it actually shows it a little more. I just cropped it and so you can see. I mean, the zebras, they're back, from above, and then there's the shadow being cast, obviously probably from the, well, I shouldn't guess from the west or the east because it isn't going to indicate. Okay, I'm going to show another photograph. And there's a saying that comes with this photograph. And I want to see if you can come up with what that saying is. What are those?
Icebergs.
Icebergs. So what's a saying about icebergs? Anybody think of anything?
I don't know about any saying. I just know that the mountain is greater underneath than above.
Aha. Do you remember the percentage? And I haven't fact checked to know for sure that it's accurate. 10% above, 90% below, right? Even an ice cube floating in water. I mean, an ice cube will float, but it will be 10% of the ice cube showing and 90% of the ice cube underwater. Saying the tip of the iceberg, right? We use that saying. Oh, it's the tip of the iceberg, which means what?
Means there's a whole lot more.
There's a whole lot more. And many times it means it's under the surface, it's hidden, it hasn't happened yet, whatever way,
Or it could be that more is coming.
Or that more is coming. That's right. And yes, not totally true in that case to the iceberg analogy, but still. Okay, third thing I'm going to show is a Hindu poem, actually. And if I was to say the word elephant, I think wouldn't conjure up too much for us. I mean, maybe an image of an elephant, in nature and so on, either an Indian elephant or an African elephant. Indian elephant, shorter
To me, it reminds definitely of an Indian elephant.
Sorry, say that again, Henry.
Oh, to me, it reminds me of India when I've seen some elephants over there.
Ah, okay. Yes. Yeah, they're used a lot. I think even still today.
Well, not only used, but they are classified as protected animals, and the farmers, they try to protect their crops from the elephants. And so they stay up sometimes all night, just, guarding their property from them and try to keep because if they end up going through, they will devastate their crops in one night, just like that. And then they have nothing to harvest.
Ah, Henry, excellent information that you're sharing. And I'm going to suggest that there's a parable about an elephant. And I'm coming to a poem that a gentleman back in the 19th century wrote about it. And so I'm just going to read it. The Blind Men and the Elephant, a poem by John Godfrey Saxe, 1816 to 1887, based upon a Hindu parable. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, oh, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake. I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough, the elephant is very like a tree. Before I flip to the next slide, I want you to be just thinking a little bit, why on earth is Debbie sharing this poem? And I want you to think in terms of parable methodology and some of the things that we're learning. Because the hint is going to be given away. Or pardon me, it's the last slide, because I did have to read a further slide. But the fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, e'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grow than, seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. So now, just before I do flip to the next concluding slide, any ideas what this poem, this actually Hindu parable, is really all about? Something to do with some of the things we've studied into, and a principle that Elder Parminder actually has reiterated on many different studies. But any ideas? Anyone want to jump in with a guesstimate?
I don't have any idea. I just see that things can be seen from a part or a part of it, but to get a picture of the whole, you would have to have a combination of them all.
Henry. Okay, well put. So oft in theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. With our interpreting of scripture, we can bring a blindness with us. And that's one of the things parable methodology assists. There still can be wrong ways of using parable methodology, but parable methodology generally assists in mistakes not occurring. And it's up to each of us individually to learn how best to do it. Matthew 15:13-14, but he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Let them, the Pharisees, alone. They be blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. And actually, I'm sorry, I thought I had put it on that slide, that what I wanted to highlight, and I don't think, I guess I didn't add it in. definitely out of time. But what is the principle? All you see is not all there is. And there was a term that
However, I mean, what you were discussing was that of the blind. So they didn't see.
well, that's true. But I mean, the parable was to point out how if you just, as you rightly delineated, Henry, if you just access one part, I mean, on an elephant's body, how different all of those parts are. And if that's all you go with, even though in their case, it was just more by touch because they obviously were blind and weren't seeing. But if that's all you go with, using whatever sense, you are going to be wrong. And so
yet they were right.
What you said, the part to understand fully, you want to look at the whole or perceive the whole. But all we see, whether it be a part or something just on the surface, a literal reading, whatever it happens to be, is not all there is. And we know that parables are hidden treasure that we have to dig for, lying under the surface, and it has to be, matched up line upon line, and a variety of different techniques brought step by each and so on. So I think let me just this is the cylinder, and again, I knew I'd be out of board space, so I did it ahead of time and thought I'd just project it on the screen. You think of a cylinder, you can see it over on the right, but if you think of a cylinder and just look from one perspective, it's just going to look like a long rectangle. If you look at it top down, you're going to think that it's a circle. So you have to take in more than one perspective. We could say 1 and 2 are examples of 2D as opposed to 3. It's still only a 2D drawing, but it's meant to represent a 3-dimensional actual cylinder. And so that's it. The point being that all we see is not all there is. We have to look at things from different perspectives, bring in context, bring in original intent, bring in a lot of other, some of the lateral reading, even with sources of information, going to good sources of information, but at the same time also confirming it by other good sources and reading laterally. And we'll get a greater depth of perspective and perception. And so, okay.
Sorry, I was just kind of thinking here mathematically. 1 plus 2 equals 3D.
Henry, very good comment. Very good comment. Our 1 plus 2 equals 3. The world wars and Diadochi wars and just different things. Thank you for that. It was an excellent observation. That's why we enjoy having all of us weigh in with input, because no one mind comes up with everything. Different things strike different people differently, and it just enriches the study. Anyway, I'm going to go to the next one. There's 3. So this is just for the sake of readability a little. I know that it ends up being a little difficult to see. And Acts 27, as I say, today's one, I wasn't prepared for my full presentation, in a sense, which wasn't scheduled until next week. So in a sense, I'm just going to be doing a little bit of preliminary introduction and maybe get a little started and pick it up next week as well. But so we know the story of Acts 27 and it goes into Acts 28. So it's both chapters, but we sort of symbolize, we just represent it with the term Acts 27. And Paul journeying to Rome, and it had been, or it ended up being his last journey. And he'd had missionary journeys all over Asia and Mediterranean, and to the 7 churches, and raised up churches and all sorts of things, that a very prolific life for the Lord after his conversion. And he ends up as a prisoner this time. This is one of the distinguishing things of this last journey, if you like. He is traveling as a prisoner. And I'll just explain some of the things with the map, and I'll stop screen share then, and we'll go to Acts itself for a moment. But starting out in Jerusalem, but in Caesarea is where the journey by sea begins for him. And the stops, basically, the ones in particular we're going to focus on in my study, will be Caesarea, Sidon, Myra. This is sort of the coast of Sicilia and the coast of Pamphylia, and Myra is in Lycia. I didn't crowd them out by putting every place name on by any means, but Myra, and that's where the ships change. And we refer to it as the ship of Alexandria because it hailed from Alexandria in Egypt. It doesn't mean that it literally was named that. It probably had a different name, but we reference it as the initial ship starting out in Caesarea and taking Paul as far as Myra, Andromidium, and then the ship of Alexandria continuing from Myra all the way through, goes through north of Rhodes over to Cnidus, and then down, doesn't really stop, but down, and then the southern edge of Crete, Samoni and Lycia, and then Fair Havens, it literally is called, on Crete there, and then some of the storms and different action, and then on Malta, and that's particularly the phase that we're interested in, Caesarea all the way through to Malta. But also Paul continues on, obviously, to Syracuse, on well, we'd say Sicily, whoops, but at the same time it's the I think I got lost in my blue screens. They say this mouse is just so sensitive. It's pretty problematic, actually. And Regium, I'm not sure if that is how it would be pronounced, but, and then Puteoli is the port. I've got it down here. Port of Rome, because Rome doesn't have a deep enough port. No, actually, it's the other direction. Yeah, Rome doesn't have a deep enough port, and so, and the API Forum and 3 taverns, and then Paul finishes off, of course, at Rome. Okay, and I'll just put it on screen again for the clarity, and we'll start the line on the whiteboard. Any questions so far? Or any comments? You've been making some very good comments. So anybody weigh in whenever you want. It just helps. There we go. We'll be sharing screen again just before we end, but, or well, a little bit later, but I'll leave it at that for the moment. Okay. Oh, I guess I didn't stop the share. Pardon me. It was already off. Sorry about that. Okay, so the I almost should wipe out all of that, but I'll leave it for now. Okay, so does anyone remember, meant to mention it while the map is still up. What does andromidium mean? Anyone remember? Name of the ship, Andromidium. No one?
I shall abide in death.
That's right, Annabelle. It's actually over here. I abide in death. Elder Test did say it. I shall abide in death, but I abide in death. And so beginning in Caesarea, and it's a fairly important hub. And I want to search out between now and next week. I do want to search out some more of the information that's in the public record in some of our different presentations, because there's some pretty interesting stuff that I know I'm remembering back to, but I need to refresh just to be able to share it more correctly and so on. But very important city. And the word Caesarea means severed. And it, well, actually, it's symbolic of the cutting out of the stone out of the mountain. And actually, I'm maybe going to go back to screen share. 1989 marks for our line 1989, but yes, I'll maybe do the screen share again and just refresh our memories a little in terms of Daniel. So Caesarea, severed, and the mountain being, or rather the stone being cut out of the mountain. Daniel 2:34 and 35. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image, obviously the image of Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar's image, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And as we know, that stone that becomes a great mountain, that mountain replaces the original mountain. And it is anything else that you just want to bring out in terms of these two texts. I'm going to do the end text of Daniel 2 as well. But cut out without hands. What does that mean?
I think it meant it was the work of God.
That's right, Douglas. Exactly. A stone was cut out without hands, without human devising. It wasn't human intervention. It was divine intervention. And of course, numbering it or counting it from 1989, the beginning of our movement. And it was just the beginning, but it was when the stone was being cut out. out of the mountain. Okay, we'll go to the other two verses referencing this. So, Daniel 2:44 and 45, last verse. And in the days of these kings, pardon me, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So the God of heaven sets up a kingdom, and it stands forever. It'll never be destroyed. And last verse, for as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain, pardon me, without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, goes back up through the metals, precious and not so metal, and not so precious, rather, goes back up through, back in time, up through the whole of the image, which is representing all of the history of the earth, up to the head of gold representing Babylon. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar's image, all of gold, he basically was making a statement. His kingdom would never be destroyed. His earthly kingdom of Babylon would never be destroyed. And yet, in a sense, as often happens with whether a newspaper headline or something in social media headline or something in scripture, he actually was detailing it accurately in that Babylon did continue through all of history, right down to the time when the stone cut out without hands out of the mountain smashes the feet of miry clay and iron and destroys, in essence, the whole image. So Nebuchadnezzar did it more under direction of God, in a sense. And he was making the statement, greedy, selfish heart, his unconverted heart, but at the same time, it was something that God intended for good. Just exit this. Okay, and I'm not going to be going too much longer because I don't want to cover things and have to redo it again next week, in a sense. I mean, review is good, but at the same time, it's partly because I was not, I was not prepared enough to the level that I would want to be for presenting. I mean, when you find out at 8:15 the night before that nobody else is presenting, and anyway, so I thought, well, you know what, I'll just bite the bullet and go for it. Anyway, I want to address, but I think I'll save it till next week's study because it has a pattern in it as well. Caesarea was where Paul was able to instruct, in a sense, 3 people, but we'll say 2. He purposely was being invited to speak to, and I'm going to introduce just briefly a little bit our timeline. Felix was who Paul had opportunity to teach first, and interestingly married to Drusilla, who was a Jewess, was Jewish, and did know a lot about what Paul, in essence, was teaching about, in a sense, and his leadership was replaced by Festus, and that change in leadership, we know it's reflected in our timeline. The priests the fractal level of the 144,000 priests, change of leadership, both externally, and we would count it as Reagan being taken over by Bush, 1991, 1989, 1991. But at the same time, we also have a change of leadership as well. Line of Christ, John the Baptist to Jesus, but also in our line, the change from the first angel's messenger to the second angel's messenger, Elder Jeff to Elder Tess. And then the second person is Agrippa, who, well, as I say, I'll save it till next week. The fours, the fourths, I'll say fours, weigh in, and the women, in a sense, weigh in, as well as the different characters. So Felix and Festus represent the United States. Agrippa represents the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And overarching this line, and I didn't write it on the board yet, but what do we refer to this line? And I've only taken it up to Myra. The switch of ships to Alexandria. I'll do it next week. But what is the line referenced amongst us? The line of Acts 27. What do we refer to it as? The fifth line. Any other designation?
Line of failure.
It's actually the line of the institutions. The line of the United States and the Seventh-day Adventist Church being represented. But in one of the studies, Elder Parminder asks a question, and I'll just toss it out now. What is an institution? And he just sort of puts out a little bit of a warning, because he doesn't actually unpack it at all. He doesn't go anywhere with that, but he just says we have to be careful in terms of our understanding of what constitutes an institution. So any idea in terms of definition of an institution? Didn't have time to put it in the notes or on the slide. I'm just going
I can read it.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Yeah, I can read it from Google.
Oh, okay, good. Go ahead.
It says it's a society or organization founded for religious, educational, social, or similar purpose. It's an establishment, a center.
Okay. Establishment is definitely a good word. And
An alliance. Yeah, very good.
an alliance, yes. Okay. I've got a Canadian dictionary here. I'll just quickly read. First definition: an organization or society established for some public or social purpose. A church, school, college, hospital, or prison is an institution. Number two definition: a building used by such an organization or society. And that's it. Often it will have the word institution even in the title. Some of the buildings, or certainly, a jail, often it just gets referenced generically as the institution over there, or maybe a mental health facility, institution, certainly back in the day in the 1950s, that was unfortunately very negatively connoted, a negative connotation to that word institution, because that's what a lot of people equated it with. You're taken away, you're locked up, because you're psychologically needing to be removed from society, and you're institutionalized. A lot of prisoners going to jail, they'll view it sort of that same kind of way, that they're being institutionalized. Sorry, go ahead, Douglas.
Actually, I had a thought here on
Sorry,
this.
Henry, yes.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, both institution and purpose. The institution is there for a certain purpose. And, so when I'm taking a look at the United States, one of the purposes that it was there for was to uphold the Constitution. And then when we're taking a look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I mean, the whole purpose is that evolving around the Sabbath. And so when it comes to an end is when it no longer upholds it, or say, for example, like with Adventism, one of the big purposes that it has is looking forward to that of the Sunday law. And if all of a sudden that time comes when they realize that the Sunday law is not going to be a Sunday law as they had imagined it as, then all of a sudden now it is destroyed for its particular purpose in that particular organization or establishment.
Okay, thank you, Henry, for adding that in. And as you were speaking, one of the things that came to my mind is in terms of, and anyone else can comment as well, is in terms of the purpose of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and you connected it immediately to the Sabbath, because the very name Seventh Day is in the name. You connected it to the Sabbath, but in a sense, I would expand it, certainly looking back with hindsight, and wisdom that we have gleaned over these years. But looking back, we could say that in reality, the purpose God raised up the Seventh-day Adventist Church was in the continuum of time. It was the entity that was, if you think in terms of a thread passing through the according to a certain theme and for all of history, or you could think of it in terms, another analogy, another parable would be running a race and passing a baton, the baton of truth, on to successive dispensations over the history of the earth. And in essence, God had that people, just as the Jews had been known as having the oracles of God, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was to be having the oracles of God. And we could say that the Protestant Reformation, it didn't complete enough. It failed in essence. And so it came to modern Israel, the Alpha, originally with the Millerites and the raising up of the Adventist Church, 1863, incorporated, and then on to the line of the 144,000, whereby the truth has been uncovered fully. And the issue, of course, isn't the seventh-day Sabbath, but it's equality, because all through time, God has, his intention, his goal always has been to restore Eden and to the at-one-ment, bringing restoration to the human race, those human beings who are willing to walk in the light. And so, Henry, I agree with the comment you were making. And I definitely, when the Sabbath issue just, doesn't materialize. There is no persecution against Sabbath keepers alone, and where Sunday is being pushed, and as it was back in the 1888 time period, it makes Seventh-day Adventism that they're still clinging to that. No, there's going to be a literal Sunday law, and it's going to be a Sabbath Sunday issue. But in a sense, it handicaps their purpose. I'll use the word freezes. It freezes them. Well, as we would put it, back in the 19th century, like they haven't progressed anywhere past that. So some of these current events, some of which we went through at the beginning, just in this last week, some of the different things that happen. Much of Adventism is not paying attention to any of it. Some things it's in their face and they have to. They'll weigh in on things like the LGBTQ, gender equality issue, and make a public statement and so on as a church body. But at the same time, as we know, the two streams of information, they're not taking in the correct stream, and therefore the literal, thus saith the Lord, the literal reading is keeping them handicapped and bound in what they believe is the truth as it was revealed in Spirit of Prophecy, the Great Controversy, early writings according to a Sunday law, and Sabbath being the one that's going to be persecuted against Sabbath keeping. Institution, the third definition, I'll just quickly, an established law, custom, or system giving presents on Christmas is an institution. So that's interesting because tradition, things can be a tradition, but in a sense, the word institution broadens that even beyond tradition. And the fourth and fifth one, a setting up institution, a setting up, an establishing, a beginning. Many people favor the institution of more clubs for young people. So that means, as a noun, an instituting of, in this example, more clubs for young people. So an institution of more clubs for young people. And then the last is an informal definition, a familiar person or thing. He's an institution around here, which usually means somebody that maybe has worked at a job X number of decades, and he's grown roots here. He's been here so long, he's an institution. So that's just an informal, sort of more slang kind of way of using that word. Henry, you wanted to add something more. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add, because a lot of times we've often had a misconception about certain things. Like in the past, when it came to 1989, where we can see, the destruction of well, we called it at that time Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we see that Russia still exists. So it's in the same kind of a sense when we're taking a look at the institution, and if there's a purpose behind it, if there's the purpose is gone, the organization itself still might exist, but it won't have the strength as it had before. It's like it lost its power. So, and that's one thing I just kind of wanted to throw in there, because again, like you said, we sometimes take a look at one aspect and then maybe another aspect, but not the three-dimensional view.
Yes. No, and that's, I'm glad you brought that point out, because King of the North, King of the South, it does for each of them. I mean, we know the King of the South dies, but what is that going to look like? Like dies meaning what? We know that it doesn't mean it's literally just going to disappear off the face of the earth or anything, fantastical like that. But same with the King of the North, the US, the interaction with the papacy, with the Muslim world, this attack this morning, Hamas on Israel and the Gaza Strip, and of course the whole. Do we have more of the third woe that's yet going to be happening? So all these entities, the major ones being King of the North and King of the South in terms of Daniel 11, but it's more complex than just the simple, right? And so all of these interactions and relationships and so on. Anyone else wanting to make a comment at this point? Anything just said? Okay. Someone's got something in the chat and I didn't see it, so let me just quickly grab that. Oh, Annabelle had to leave. She's already gone. That's, we come and go as we need to, because sometimes there are other things going on in the background for any one of us. So what I'm going to do now is share screen again one last time, because I think I'm going to end off here, as I say, so I have a little more opportunity to be a little better prepared. Oops. A little better prepared for next time. And we'll just close off with a quote. It's not anything fancy, that was anything specific to Acts 27, but I'm just going to put it into the record and we'll have a closing prayer. So this is Review and Herald, April 11th, 1893, paragraph 7. There is less, and it references in a sense ancient Israel, but line of Christ, but a little bit of comparison and contrast with today, which of course isn't the alpha of modern Israel, it's more the omega of modern Israel, and the line of 144,000 for us. There is less excuse in our day for stubbornness and unbelief than there was for the Jews in the days of Christ. They did not have before them the example of a nation that had suffered retribution of their unbelief and disobedience. But we have before us the history of the chosen people of God, who separated themselves from him and rejected the Prince of Life. Though they could not convict him of sin, though they could not fail to see their own hypocrisy, they hated the Prince of Life because he laid bare their evil ways. In our day, greater light and greater evidence is given. We have also their example, the warnings and reproofs that were presented to them. And our sin and its retribution will be the greater if we refuse to walk in the light. Many say, if I had only lived in the days of Christ, I would not have wrested his words or falsely interpreted his instruction. I would not have rejected and crucified him, as did the Jews. But that will be proved by the way in which you deal with his message and his messengers today. So very applicable for any of us, and certainly for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Lord is testing the people of today as much as he tested the Jews in their day, when he sends his messages of mercy, the light of his truth. That's defining. Pardon me, when he sends his messages of mercy. And what are his messages of mercy? The light of his truth, progressive light. He is sending the Spirit of truth to you. And if you accept the message, you accept of Jesus. those who declare that if they had lived in the days of Christ, they would not do as did the rejectors of his mercy, will today be tested. Those who live in this day are not accountable for the deeds of those who crucified the Son of God. But if with all the light that shone upon his ancient people, so ancient Israel, Alpha and Omega, but also, which was Christ's line, the Omega of ancient Israel, but also even now Ellen White's dispensation, the Alpha of modern Israel. We have light, all the light that was given to them as well. But if with all the light that shone upon his ancient people, delineated before us, we travel over the same ground, cherish the same spirit, refused to receive reproof and warning, then our guilt will be greatly augmented, and the condemnation that fell upon them will fall upon us. Only it will be as much greater as our light is greater in this age than was their light in their age. Very, very solemn representation. And obviously, we want to be found on the right side of the issue. But I mean, a lot there, and I'm not going to unpack it, break it down bit by bit by any means. But in general, the line of the institutions, first ship, I abide in death, I shall abide in death. Not the ship you want to be on. And at the same time, the light that we have received has compounded, right? The light God has given through all the dispensations of time down to our day, and still yet, God hasn't been able to get us to the Sunday law, and then on to the close of probation, and then on to the second advent, because we are not fully understanding the test for this time, gender equality. And I mean, there are other factors, I'm sure, as well, too. But so I'm going to leave it there. Acts 27, part 1. We didn't get too far into it, but we will continue it on next Sabbath. And, so I'll have a closing prayer. We'll end the recording. And then if there are any other further comments, certainly are visiting, I'll have a closing hymn as well. And we'll open it up for comments, question, and also visiting. Anyway, let's pray. Dear gracious, loving God, we see the seriousness. External events herald the sound of an approaching God. Internally, events, both corporately within Adventism, but also even yet within our movement, are letting us know the solemnity and the seriousness of the times in which we're living. And we ask that you will quicken us and make us efficient. Help us to be teachable. Help us to examine ourselves, to surrender all the cultivated and inherited tendencies that we still yet possibly cling to. purify us, that we may be fit vessels. And we just pray that as events continue and we draw ever closer to the Sunday law, that we will make it a determined effort on our part, individually, to be in the correct stream of information and to really being allowing it to change us and for you to transform us. The fact that we're still in the agitation of the Sunday law lets us know that more work needs to be done. And as we come to greater understanding in regards to the Levites, and Elder Parminder asking the question at one point in one of the studies, are the Levites a group or individuals? We want to continue learning and growing. So bless us to this end and be with us in the new week as it comes. Help us to be able to navigate all the challenges that each of us are facing, and be with your people worldwide. In Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen. We will stop the recording.
Amen. Thank you.